I want to thank Madison Police Chief Mike Koval and State Public Defender Kelli Thompson for joining us at WisEye FishFry. You know, this is a pretty informal place, but we're trying to discuss some serious subjects, so thanks very much for
Before we get
time.
too serious, can I say two things?
Oh, sure.
Well, number one, I wanted to say congratulations. It's your 1-year anniversary on the job.
I thought you were going to go with condolences, Chief. It's been a long 10 years, and it's been, no, thank you very much.
1 year. Also, I wanted to say I came prepared.
Oh,
because
you guys are being fed the wrong rhetoric.
You have a reputation of...
Well, you know, when you're around these cops who like monosyllabic grunts, you try to do a little enhancement with polysyllabic sentence structure.
Is it working?
Look at the disrespect that you get. Seriously.
Is
Okay,
it working?
somebody has definitely given you insider trading, so we're going to have to do an investigation.
Okay, well, can we move on?
Yes, please.
All right. I really do want to ask this question. In the wake of what is now showing up in incidents in Baltimore, North Charleston, South Carolina, Cleveland, New York City, Tulsa with the reserve deputy, what's your reactions as professionals in the law enforcement and criminal justice to some of these national incidents? Do you want to go first, Chief?
Well, that's fine. I think that above and beyond the role we play as practitioners, I think that the sensibilities of the human condition are always offended when we see that sort of shocking misconduct that's occurring or excessiveness on the part of the police. The police should be an institution that we all come to trust because they are sort of the stewards of the community. And when we see the police behaving badly, and seemingly without the sort of accountability one would hope that you would see from the police department, or if there's a lot of denial or excuse making, that becomes problematic for the entire profession, because there is no doubt that the national narrative has a trickle-down effect for us at a local level as well.
Kelli, you've been representing, as a public defender, you have a long career as a public defender. You must have a different reaction when you see some of these graphic footage.
It's interesting. You know, I think everybody's first feeling is just the tragedy. You see the raw emotion that we're seeing across the nation from the families and from friends, from the community, is obviously something that's just heart-wrenching, because I think it's hard. It doesn't matter if you're a professional, community member, any position that you have, your first thought is your own family and your own community. And to watch these playing out, it's devastating. I think it's devastating for everyone. As a public defender, my feeling is, and my thoughts go to, you have the very public image of all of this, and obviously communication is so important, information is so important, but doing it in the most professional and productive way possible, because these cases, things will happen after the fact, and we want to make sure the facts get out. So you have to give people an opportunity to have that emotion, have those feelings, and then we have to make sure that we have the investigation, because most of the time it's my clients in front of the media, and having those cases played out in the media are so difficult, because once those images are out there, it's very hard to take that back. So my hope is that a thorough investigation goes on, and that the right information gets out to everyone, because I think that's the only way that our criminal justice system continues to be credible, and that people feel that it's a credible institution.
And speaking of a thorough investigation, Wisconsin is the first state in the nation to have an outside investigative agency invest police shootings. Thoughts on that? We're kind of, you know, I don't want to say an innovator, but well, yeah, the first state in the nation to do this.
I think Wisconsin's an innovator for many reasons, and I think we saw an issue, and obviously this is not something that I'm involved in. I wouldn't have any information outside of what the public would have in the newspaper, but I think it's important. I think especially the law enforcement community, stepping up and saying, okay, we're okay with having an outside investigation go on, because we want to make sure that people have confidence in what we do. We want people to have confidence in the criminal justice system and have confidence in that investigation. That takes time, and I think that's where we see frustration sometimes with people. But I think it's important that Wisconsin has taken those steps to try and rectify an issue, and I think Wisconsin's known for that.
And Chief, your thoughts on the same question?
Well, I think it's important because today, now more than ever, the two things things that I hear most often from constituents is that we want transparency and we want accountability. And I think to the extent that it's literally being farmed out to a third party to investigate it, and I have probably the same wealth of knowledge that anybody reading the local papers has, it has been that sacrosanct in terms of their confidentiality and circumspect attention to the details of what has to be turned over to the DA's office. Knowing that, I think, means everything to the public perceptions of what can be trusted as the process moves forward.
Is it too much to call these excesses? Chief, let me ask you, some of these incidences in the Baltimore, the North Charleston, the Cleveland, New York City, would you consider those outliers and not excesses? Because my question is, do we need national training standards so that officers like yours who are very highly trained have the same response skills in some of these instantaneous shoot or no shoot situations as in North Charleston, South Carolina?
Yeah, the purpose of certifying police officers state by state is to reflect those needs. To the point of whether there be a uniformity in those national standards, that's interesting because sometimes when you do a national campaign, you sort of dumb it down to the lowest common denominator rather than elevate everybody's game. So I want to be respectful of that. But the other thing is that as difficult as this is to grasp, just so that we're clear, the use of deadly force by cops towards citizens is in and of itself the anomaly. Nationally, well over 96% of the contacts between police and citizens are dealt with in two mechanisms: presence and professional communication. Then you go into the next 3 to 4%, which is sort of the tasers, the pepper mace, the putting up your dukes, a baton even. So we're talking nationally of about like less than 1%. I thought I saw it was 0.55 of 1%. But they're scandalous. They're very, very in your face. I don't mean to put a soft spin on it. We have to be accountable for those incidences because those can't be anything more than an outlier. In order to do that, we do have to do more sophisticated training. And we have to do training that involves moving away from deadly force altogether. Tactical disengagement, movement, looking for cover, creating distance, and exploring other non-lethal or less lethal mechanisms are really important. The smart guns being one of them. Those guns that are currently out there that have a computer chip in them, if I draw that gun, it'll fire from my hand, but if a suspect tries to disarm me and shoot me with my own gun, the gun won't fire. But we need to have, as consumers, more accountability from the manufacturing industry to make that the new benchmark.
Well, Kelly, just to follow up on that subject, do your public defender clients, do you find a variety in police responses from very educated and sophisticated agencies like Madison as compared to a very small agency in northern Wisconsin? Are the rules different in how they interact and potentially arrest some of your agency's clients?
I think for the most part, and this is anecdotal, I don't have any hard numbers, that for the most part the interactions are professional. You know, if you get up into rural Wisconsin, oftentimes people know each other, and it's a personal communication. I will say some of the difficulties that we're seeing, and I think, giving Chief Koval kudos on this, is crisis intervention teams and the training, the mentally ill that are coming into our criminal justice system. Oftentimes not even being charged with a crime, coming in other ways, or being charged with a crime, and we can go right back to their mental health issues. Madison has taken a lead role in training their officers, and that's difficult. There is that healthcare part of it, and we are trying to get that out. We do have a lot of rural counties that are taking that on as well. They're identifying issues that they're seeing and then working as teams. Wisconsin has a very strong presence in the local communities of coordinating coordinating councils where we have all the players in the system. We have a way outside of the courtroom where we can all come together and say, we have an issue and we need to deal with it. And that really isn't falling on deaf ears. It's working with law enforcement. It's working with the district attorney's office, the judges, and most importantly, I think, is the healthcare society too, or the healthcare community, because they're coming to that table too to talk about these issues. And the crisis intervention team and the mental health professionals, I think, are going to play a key role in the criminal justice system.
So Dane County, can I jump to the Tony Robinson case? Dane County DA Ishmael Ozan is going to come out with his decision any day now. I mean, he's going to give 48 hours notice. So you have 48 hours from the time of the decision, but have presumably already been preparing for this to come out. How confident are you that your team is prepared?
Well, I think that in the immediate response to whatever there may be, if people on one side of the aisle or other choose to engage in dissent by taking on protests or rallies or marches, Madison's been pretty customer focused in terms of facilitating those First Amendment rights of assembly, as is the case with expression. Obviously, the outliers for any demonstration are those who then choose to harm others or their other people's property. Fortunately, looking at the 95-5 rule, Madison people, this isn't their first rodeo. They understand how civil disobedience works and how to engage and work with the police. Given the tremendous, those sort of visceral emotions surrounding this, yeah, we have to plan for this, but we also had to plan for the Final Four. We planned for Mifflin Street. We planned for Halloween. So it's not like we think that there's gloom and doom around the verdict's door. But I think long term is that I've always been urging is that you can be dissentful, you can be completely contemptuous of the verdict or the police, but I would think that long term, creating a dialogue on racial disparities issues, we're going to be infinitely better off from a community that's intact versus fractured moving forward.
You know, you've been trying all along. There's the concern about doing something like the reaction that's been taking place in Ferguson, right? And that hasn't happened here. Yeah. And but then on the other side, we've had some protests blocking East Washington Avenue, not for a minute, but the whole day, 8 hours. Is there any way to find a median in there somewhere, some sort of medium? You know,
how do you balance that?
Yeah.
Where the protesters should block East Wash for 2, 4, 6, or 8 hours, Chief?
In the norm, up until that time, the most we had yielded an intersection was 27 minutes, and that was our outer limit. In this particular instance, Madison was one of but a series of national initiatives being launched the same day. And I said to my command staff, cut them a wide swath. It's an opportunity for civic engagement. It's going to be right by East High. Let's show students what civil disobedience looks like and how it works. Then, quite frankly, when it became clear that the motive was to force the arrest issue, that's what took longer than it should have in terms to muster our resources. But that was at the excessive end. I don't think that we can afford to do that as a typical norm, because we're balancing those First Amendment rights, but also those rights of other people's freedom of movement and to get to point A to point B.
I want to come back to a point that Kelly made earlier. YouTube was born 10 years ago. Is it a good thing now that any police and suspect or arrest can show up on YouTube? You kind of talked about the impact of YouTube. Is that a good thing?
I think, like anything, it has some very positive parts and some negative parts. We are seeing things, you know, people's rights being protected or not protected on those YouTube videos, making sure that we are following appropriate measures. The one thing, like any social media, we have to make sure that it's the full picture, and that oftentimes doesn't happen. You know, when does that video start? What happened prior to that video? What happened after that video? We have seen it as of late with the police shootings, but taking that a step back, usually it's my clients for the most part, and making sure that if it's telling part of a story, that people recognize it's telling part of a story. And then obviously my expertise isn't with angles and what's in and out of those videos. That would be maybe more in law enforcement. But we have to, I think the fact that we have police cameras nowadays on the cars and people are watching those, we're seeing some benefit to that.
What about body cams?
Well, that's what, of course, the City of Madison is going to be doing an exhaustive 360-degree study on this summer. My sense is that that study will be a little tilted in light of the events of March 6th now, because people are so, morally affronted by that. If there only been a body-worn camera, this whole thing would have been more transparent. And I get that. I understand that the cameras have their mechanism, but let's be clear. Just because you're getting full transparency does not necessarily become the functional equivalent of full accountability. How many of us amongst the millions have seen the young man who was choked in New York on YouTube? And high transparency, but to those constituents living in that neighborhood to date, absolutely no accountability. So the two are not the same. And also Madison being Camelot, I worry sometimes that we understand that once we open that genie's bottle, the privacy issues can run amok.
I have a question about race.
Yeah.
Why does it appear recently that only African Americans are shot by white officers? Now, that's a gross generalization, but so maybe my larger question is the dimension of the umbrella of race over some of these incidents. Kelli, you want to talk about that?
Sure. I think that's one issue in a multitude of issues. I think we are seeing the topic of disproportionate minority confinement that is being discussed in the media more often. Right here in Madison, we have the Race to Equity report and some of the racial gaps that we have in education, in our workforce, in the criminal justice system. So I think people are more aware. We have a community in Madison, to its credit, outside of the criminal justice system, in the community where people are taking these issues on, which is very important. I think there's this frustration, there's this emotion, and I think people on the other side are saying, but now we need to problem solve. We have these issues. We know we have these issues. We have a study. We are all coming to that table, but we're beyond the blame game. We need to start finding solutions. We need to learn how to keep our kids out of the criminal justice system. We need to learn how to keep our kids in school. We need to make sure there are good employment opportunities for our kids, no matter what the color of their skin. And those are tough conversations, because people tend to want to go to their corners and be defensive, and we can't do that anymore. And I think these shootings, that's just one more layer of what people are seeing in this rise of just utter emotion and kind of a helplessness. And I think we're going to see that on the other side of people saying, okay, we're not helpless. Now we need to figure out how to work on this together. And I think Madison's already started. The community leaders that have come out, I think, with Chief Koval and now some of the groups that are coming out to say what we should be doing to take the next step, that's significant. I think that will continue to just put Madison and Wisconsin as a leader in this discussion.
Chief, on the racial part of this debate?
Well, in terms of as sad as a commentary it is with the death of Tony Robinson, I did sort of look through the departments, our unique history where officer-involved shootings. And aside from a mentally ill man last year who was African-American in April, right after the new law went into effect, who ended up stabbing 3 people, killing 2 of them before he assaulted our officers and we took his life. We do not have this chronicled history of shooting African-American men. That's the anomaly for the history of this department. Now, having said that, I don't mean to mitigate anything here. Having said that, though, clearly all of the footage we're seeing on the national narrative has been African men, black men, typically many of them unarmed. So this thing has taken on a life of its own, and I also think that many people have used this case, our case, as sort of the proverbial tipping point now with all the racial disparities we've seen economically, with the educational issues that have been unabated. So I think this has just sort of been the last gasp of we're desperate, we need institutional change, and the police are the most conspicuous as government in this very violent action. So I think that's why this has created a heightened issue of race.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Can I ask the last question?
You can. I thought we were already out of time, actually.
When somebody sees a TV footage, a news show, a news segment, a news clip, and it goes back to the standard of white officers and a black victim, what should they think in terms about what should be their reaction? Should they more information? What larger debate should it trigger in someone watching that news story? Kelly, your thoughts?
My first thought after, again, when we talked about that emotion, is that could be my client.
Yeah.
And mine is for everyone to take a deep breath and let the process. We have to have good communication. We have to have good leadership. We have to have accountability and transparency, as Chief Koval said. But we need to let the process happen. That's why we have the laws that we have. We have the investigative tools that we have. We have the prosecutor's office. We have a strong public defense system. That's so important. And people want information, but we have to do it correctly. We have to do it right, because once the misinformation's out there, it's so hard to take that back. And usually it's my clients that are at the end of that with that misinformation.
And your thought on?
Well, again, overwhelmingly, contacts between police and citizens are resolved peaceably and mediated. At the end of the day, though, we have to do a better job of education at every level, at every threshold, in terms of telling citizens, here are your rights, and conversely, here are the limitations placed on police powers. I think that as you're a good consumer of what the Constitution provides and what the cops can or can't do, infinitely, a lot of these urban myths are debunked, and there's a greater sense of understanding of what goes on.
Public Defender Kelli Thompson, Madison Police Chief Mike Koval.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us at WisEye FishFry. You want a goodbye cheese curd?
Yeah, that'll be very good for the cardiovascular. Thank you.
Thank you
so
very,
much.
very
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.